This is Kenya's biggest conversation, The Situation Room, broadcasting on SpiceFM in Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, Nakuru, Eldoret, Nyeri, Malindi. And we are all over the world on SpiceFM KE, on YouTube. We're live streaming on Facebook, and we're also live streaming on Twitter. So you can catch the show from wherever you are. And we know that we've got some audience, people tuning in from Zambia this morning, as well as South Africa, as well as Australia, and our friends in New Zealand. Good morning, everybody. Today is the International Human Rights Day. So happy International Human Rights Day. We're going to have a conversation about ending gender-based violence. But let's begin with the day's proverb, City.
Kaa na mwimbaji na utaimba wimbo.
Kaa na mwimbaji na utaimba wimbo. Some sort of reminded me of a program I used to listen to on KBC VUK. Wimbo ni upendao. Remember on Sunday afternoons? Na mchungaji Christopher Arab Muthui.
Ni sawa.
Ni sawa? Yeah. So our guest for this conversation, Angelina Sikanda. She's a program development manager at CREAW Kenya. She joins us via video link. Good morning, Angelina.
Good morning, Eric. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Good to have you on the show. Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation, and happy International Human Rights Day.
Happy International Human Rights Day to you too.
And Isabella Mwangi, program officer at the same organization, CREAW, is joining us live in the studio. Good morning, Isabella.
Good morning.
Good to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
This is Kenya's biggest conversation, and we call that the hot seat. But now, because you're sharing the seat with two others, we shall just call that hot seat A.
Wow.
Main hot seat. Main hot seat, because you came and sat on it. We'll be joined shortly by Judy Gitao. She's the regional coordinator for Equality Now. And the conversation we're having is on ending gender-based violence. Today being the last day of the 16 days of activism on gender-based violence. They began on the 25th of November, the International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women. And they've been running until today, the 10th of December, International Human Rights Day. City.
You know, every time we talk about gender-based violence, you see where my mind goes to is, how did it come about? Why did it get to a point where anytime you're talking about violence and gender-based violence, you talk about it in the absence of the genesis and in the absence of the contributory factors. The question that I wanted to ask Judy Gitao, but Judy isn't here. Nonetheless, since you are here, I will ask you. There is this concept of a generational equality. Okay?
Yeah.
In your mind, is it something that is achievable? And in which generation do you think it will be achievable?
Right. Thank you very much. And as the name suggests, generation equality. So one, the whole idea is it might not be achieved within my generation, but then it is to be achieved within subsequent generations. So it could be achieved, some of these commitments could be achieved within our kids' generation or our grandchildren's generation. And so ideally, FGM should end by next year, which is 2022, as Uhuru had committed. Gender-based violence should end by 2026. Whether it will have ended by then, that we are waiting for that, because there are a lot of structures that need to be put in place, bold investments as they have been proclaimed, but then we need to see them translate. But what we can say is the initiatives are good, they are bold, would want to see them actualized. But I can assure you by 2022, FGM will not have been eradicated, but it will have reduced. By 2026, we might not have gender-based violence eradicated, but we'll definitely would want to see the numbers come down, because currently, as we speak, there's a surge. And so the whole concept is it's not to be done this generation, but it's a conversation that needs to continue among several generations.
All right. So then I guess, to you, Angelina, so what are some of the interventions that CREAW as an organization is undertaking to ensure the actualization of this? Because we talk about, all right, it's possible that we will not have reached the numbers that we want to reach by 2022, 2026. But obviously there are things that are being done, right? So what are some of those things that are being done then to keep this commitment?
Right. Thank you for that. So some of the things that are happening is that one, government has committed money towards this whole process of addressing gender-based violence. We as an institution have made addressing gender-based violence a component of our work. And we are resourcing that kind of work, being able to make sure that every woman, girl, man out there is able to access legal services, is able to access psychosocial services, especially those who've gone through violations. We're able to engage in a conversation around prevention, because the bigger issue is about how do you make sure people are not violated. So we're engaging in that kind of intervention where we are trying to teach ourselves new behaviors of engaging, of addressing conflict, so that violence does not become an option. We have also put in a hotline where you're able to access services that are required from the health to access to justice, that is the judiciary, to be able to navigate through the process within the different sectors and make sure that we save as many lives as we can in this process. We know the government has also put out a model called Policare, which is supposed to be able to support with one-stop care service for survivors of gender-based violence. So we are working with government to support that kind of an intervention so that survivors have an easier time trying to access services. Two, we start transforming our sectors in terms of looking at spaces where we can be able to prevent, but also attend in a dignified manner to the survivors. So as an institution, this is something that's very dear to us. We've been doing it for quite some time, and so we're just happy that the GEF then brings government to work together with us as civil society in addressing this particular issue that's really getting out of hand in our country.
Today is International Human Rights Day, and this question then comes to Isabella. So what does this day entail, and how does it tie in with the Generation Equality campaign?
So International Human Rights Day was first established in 1948. And so what we are celebrating is something that started a long time ago during the World Wars. And every year we have a different theme. And for 2021, the theme this year around is largely around ensuring that we are creating safer and fairer societies for future generations. And so that now ties in with the generation equality, because we are ensuring that we are not just creating a future on a fair justice system now that is going to take care of us now, but we want to be able to forecast and be able to ensure that my children's children are able to come and find a system that is going to flow in terms of ensuring human rights are there too. And this is critical because when we talk about human rights, we are talking about the core fundamental rights and freedoms, the ones that you cannot absolutely do without. And Kenya, especially in Africa, Kenya is one of those countries that has enjoyed human rights and democracy largely. If you have whole conversations with other countries where we have this legal discourse of how they keep asking us, how are you able to go on Twitter and say something about your president and sleep at night? Well, where else in other countries that wouldn't be happening. And so that type of democracy, that type of right, freedom of expression, a right to food, housing, we want to ensure that by the time other generations come in, they're going to find a foundation that is well developed. And so that's how it ties in with generation equality, because we are securing a future for the generation to come.
Our other guest now joins us in the studio. Judy Gitau is the Regional Coordinator for Equality Now. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you.
Traffic.
Lots of traffic.
And it's raining.
It is.
And this is Nairobi.
Well,
and we are constructing the expressway. So all those things, put them together, and you experience what you've experienced.
I did. I'm sorry.
Paul Sana.
Oh, no. It is us who are commiserating with you. Yes.
For what you've gone through.
Yes.
Yeah.
We apologize.
I think you deserve coffee.
Yes.
Good
You
stroke.
do, right? Yes, you'll get some very good coffee shortly. So tell us about Equality Now.
Well, Equality Now is an international women's rights organization that works for a just world for women and girls. And in doing so, we work on ending sexual violence. We work on ending sex trafficking. We work on, shall we say, ending harmful practices, but specifically child marriage and female genital mutilation. And finally, we work on ending inequality in law, so legal equality, where men and women have equal rights in the law.
So, there's a specific case been made by, or being experienced and being made by Equality Now. Can you tell us on FGM specifically? Hopefully, as we have said before, it's hopeful that we'll end by 2022, but probably not likely.
In the next 20 days.
Yeah. But probably not likely. So what are you seeing in terms of the practice and the hopeful end to it?
Well, let me start by saying, in as much as we're saying it's not likely, it's good to start with political will. It's good to start with an aspiration. It's good to start with a foundation that says that we will end it, because then we'll have state actors aligning the legal frameworks, aligning the policies, aligning different government departments and so on to work towards ending female genital mutilation. But having said that, especially in the context of, for example, COVID-19, we've seen violations being exacerbated, if you will. For instance, as soon as COVID began, it was when the first case was announced, was it March 2020? At the end of that month, we were being called as an institution to rescue girls in Kajiado who had been cut and were being transitioned into marriage. And in other parts, we had statistics of up to 75 because schools had subsequently schools closed under the cover of girls not going to school, and therefore people not being able to track whether or not they're being married or for being cut. About 75 girls in Samburu had been again mapped out for cutting and then subsequently being married off. And so the numbers are high. And so what we are working with is not just the existing of a legal framework. We need to change mindsets. We need people to understand that that which is their culture is not good. Is indeed it's a violation, and it comes to torture. A second angle to it is we have to fight emerging issues, emerging discussions. I'm not sure you may know this, but about 3 years ago now, I think, a female doctor filed a case in court seeking for FGM to be legalized.
Yeah.
And so you find then the discussion becomes Dr. Tatu Kamau, and the discussion then becomes, is it that we are violating African culture? And the Constitution provides in 10 in our values, in Article 10, our values. So these are our values. What then happens, and so on and so forth. And on the one hand, you're fighting, people who already think it's part of culture, and on the other, you're fighting people who are elite, who begin to perhaps file, if you will, academic litigation cases in court to sort of prove a point and erode the work that's been ongoing. But there is hope. Numbers in Kenya have been decreasing, which is good. And within the context, as we're talking about Generation Equality Forum, we have 12 key commitments by the government, amongst which FGM is one, where we are hoping that the resources that have been committed, including $23 million, go towards addressing this as a fundamental issue.
You have to ask this question. FGM is a symptom of a much larger problem. The perpetration of it, generally gender-based violence. What I'd like to know is, what have we done to understand the root causes of these things and to put a halt to that? Because if you put a halt to that, everything else that we're saying then becomes infinitely easier. But if we just tackle the symptom, the problem remains unmoved.
That's an excellent observation. And so there's two sides indeed of the coin. There's the drivers that are bringing us to this point, but then there's the survivors who are now on this and that must be responded to. And indeed, a lot of our discussions speak to the actions that are being done to respond to the survivors, who are many in number. But let's come this way in terms of drivers. This patriarchy, social norms that are a part of us. I like saying this, and I've said it perhaps too many times, that there's usually, within our communities, a discussion as though rights are 10 bowls in a bucket, that if women get 6, men only have 4. That is the attitude with which we come to the table. When we're born, we're not having that discussion, but no sooner than And that's what we begin thinking, and then we begin competing, and then we have gender roles. Gender is a social construct. I mean, if you go to a different country, the attitudes and the conduct of a man in Kenya is not necessarily the attitudes and the conduct of a man in Nigeria, for example.
Sure.
And so you find that boys are told different things and girls are told different things. And the attributes, for example, boys are assertive. And so if you find a girl who's assertive, the question is, what's your problem? And so all of these things build up to a point that when we're now competing, quote unquote, for our rights, then men begin exerting themselves because they understand this to be their role as of right.
Yeah, the question now begins, what about the boy child?
Absolutely. And yet, again, balls are not 10. Go for your rights. Nobody is stopping you from accessing education as a man. If we're saying we're increasing X funds for girls to go to school because majority have been, waylaid by pregnancies and so on, nobody has stopped the boys from going to school. Go to school, let's meet at the top. If we're saying we're addressing female genital mutilation, if we're saying we're addressing child marriage, tell me, how many boys are married off at 12? So at the end of the day, it's not that anybody is standing in the way of men and boys from accessing their rights. In fact, we encourage them to join us at the top. The idea is, let's the underlying issues and underlying causes speak to our culture, speak to our norms, speak to the values that are entrenched and are kept and are curated, if you will, by tradition and so on, resulting in what we're seeing today. And so that indeed needs to be addressed. And believe it or not, as we're championing this GEF discourse, amongst the funds is addressing and research into that commitment of, I think, 1 million per year to research into GBV and GBV causes, and so to be able to specifically and directly address them. As we go along.
So today's International Human Rights Day. Isabella, how does this then tie into International Human Rights Day, even as we commemorate the day, and we're looking at all these other things that either must end or themes that are then being introduced, actions that are being taken? How do all of these things tie in?
So one of the things that how it's able to tie in is, one, we are able to talk about catalyzing collaborative action. We are able to ensure that all actors come into play and we have one common agenda. So what GF has done for us this time round is list our issues, articulate what we want. And so we have one common agenda, we have one common message this time round. Unlike other times when everyone has always come in with their interests, this time it's very clear this is where the government wants to head. This is also in line with where the society wants to head. So there is that collective action. Then the second thing is that it is sparking continuous conversation globally, regionally, and locally. And this time around, because we are very clear on what we want, the conversation is centered. We are not waylaid by other things that come along. This time around, we have ensured politics does not come into play within the 16 days of activism, which always tends to happen. So we are it has been able to establish that the conversation is the 12 commitments, very clear in terms of these 12 commitments is something that that is going to help the society. And as Judy has said, not just look at it from a legal aspect, but we're able to change their hearts and minds. And that is where it all begins. And then in regards to the conversation ongoing, it then sparks the ideas of how do we invest to ensure that there's implementation of these 12 commitments. And then lastly, there is the issue of being able to deliver concrete actions to ensure that both women and girls are able to enjoy their rights as enshrined. And in that regard, just as Judy was saying, right now we are trying to see if we can shift the conversation from response to prevention. There has been a lot of work that has been done in regards to response, and looking at the commitments, most of the commitments tend to look at the respond. We are responding by investing. We are responding by, and so CREAW and other partners like Equality Now, we did a research on prevention, GBV prevention models that exist in the country, which are there are quite a few, but none that the government has adopted. And so we are currently doing advocacy and policy towards, or rather lobbying the government to start now part of the investment to be able to look into prevention strategies that are going, or models that are going to look into ensuring we stop before
before we get there.
Right.
As we conclude the conversation this morning, Angelina, what is it that you see that needs to be done to get us to at least as close as possible to achieving what we have all set out to achieve? Well, by 2022 and FGM, by 2026 and GBV. What do we need to do to get as much as possible into this bucket?
Well, yeah, good question. When the president was making the commitment, we saw some bold steps. He brought cultural leaders even to State House to sign commitments. Now, what we're looking for that needs to happen is how do we translate that and implement the same in our spaces. It's one thing for leaders to stand and say, oh, I don't support. It's another thing to see actual action within the community. So what we need to do for to achieve this by 2022, then definitely behavior has to change. Our understanding and some of the cultural practices that we do, for example, the issue of FGM, we need to safeguard the lives of our children. A 12-year-old has no business, addressing issues of sexuality. Their mind is there to develop, so let's respect them, allow them to be children. Can we influence our behavior in terms of how we understand conflict? As human beings, we need to acknowledge that we don't always agree. We are not a homogeneous group of people. We'll always have our differences. We'll always be different from one another. But that doesn't mean that if we disagree, then violence becomes the way to a solution. We need to be able to adopt new ways of engaging together and dialogue. That it's okay to disagree, and you can part ways and live separate and coexist together. And that violence is not the solution to make us live as one team. And therefore, we need to be able to acknowledge these differences and also adopt a system that says there are other options. And therefore, what are these platforms where we can be able to engage and address the issues that we have in a manner that is respectful, that we respect our children, whether they're boys, whether they're girls, create opportunities for them to grow and to thrive. As institutions, we are there to support and be able to look at what else, who's missing in this conversation. So as it gets to 2022, we need to look at who's missing in this discussion, who needs to get on board. Government has given political will at the national level. At the county level, how does this translate? Who is missing from this discussion? What are the counties doing to make sure that we actualize this? Those that don't have policies in place and framework, how do we support them to be able to adopt those that really are the same views that we are trying and aspiring to achieve, especially in addressing the inequality? So those are the missing pieces that we need to address. And of course, beyond that, it's look at our education system and see where is the missing gap, so that by the time you're an adult, it's very hard to change behavior as an adult. But if we start adopting this kind of culture from the time when we are young, then it's very easy to live as an experience of non-violence from the time you are young all the way up. That said, you can still adopt new ways of engaging, you can still be able to coexist together, and, violence doesn't have to be a factor, but rather coexistence and peaceful living of everybody will be our agenda at the end of the day. So everybody comes on board, we play our part, and I'm sure we can achieve it even at 2022. It's not impossible. If I take responsibility for myself and I say, if I see something wrong and I say, listen, I can see a valid disagreement, violence is not the way to go. Let's look for another way. We can save lives and be able to protect ourselves. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us, lady. And we wish you once again a happy International Human Rights Day. I'm sure you have various activities lined up today, and all the best with that. And as you continue with your programs through the year. Angelina Sikanda is a program development manager at CREAW Kenya. She has been joining us from a video link. Judy Gitao, Regional Coordinator Equality Now, and Isabella Mwangi, Program Officer at CREAW Kenya, have been with us in the studio. Asanteni sana, lady. Have a good day.